In the hushed expanse of the hospital, where life and death hang in delicate balance, a resilient black nurse faces prejudice and racial discrimination. An arrogant doctor, wielding his authority, brazenly humiliates her in front of a patient. Little does he know, the man lying in the hospital bed is far from ordinary. What is the truth about the mysterious patient's identity? And what will happen when the veil of secrecy is lifted? This story will take you through a spectrum of emotions, from indignation at injustice to hope for a better future. Before we delve into the story, let us know where you're watching from. Share your city or country in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow we'll bring you another inspiring story, tailored just for you. The story begins. St. Mary's General Hospital, an emblem of medical excellence in an affluent neighborhood, is about to face an unexpected challenge. This is when Maya Parker, a talented black nurse, joins their staff. Unbeknownst to her, she is about to confront deep-seated prejudices. As tensions escalate and conflicts arise, a seemingly ordinary patient named James Edwards quietly observes from his bed. But Mr. Edwards is no ordinary patient. His presence is about to change everything. What hidden power does this enigmatic patient hold? And how will one nurse's struggle catalyze change throughout the institution? Let's find out. But before we dive into this story, comment below where you're watching from, and if you're enjoying this story with its twists and turns and moments of justice, don't forget to subscribe. The pristine corridors of St. Mary's General Hospital gleamed under the fluorescent lights as Maya Parker took her first steps inside. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and an undercurrent of tension that churned her stomach. Despite her apprehension, Maya straightened her back and held her head high, determined to make a good impression. As she approached the nurse's station, Maya noticed a sudden hush fall over the area. Small conversations dwindled to whispers, and eyes darted away as if afraid to meet hers. She swallowed hard, trying to suppress the familiar feeling of isolation that threatened to overwhelm her. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm Maya Parker, the new nurse. Could you please direct me to the head nurse's office?" A blonde nurse looked up, her blue eyes widening slightly before a saccharine smile spread across her face. "Of course," she replied, her tone polite yet cold. "Down the hall, third door on the right." Maya nodded her thanks and walked down the hallway, acutely aware of the eyes following her every step. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, each one like a thunderclap in the unnaturally quiet space. As she neared the office, a tall, distinguished man in a white coat emerged from a nearby room. His salt and pepper hair and authoritative demeanor suggested he was a senior physician. Maya's heart quickened with hope. Perhaps this was her chance to make a positive connection. "Good morning, doctor," she said, offering a warm smile. "I'm Maya Parker, a new nurse starting today. It's a pleasure to meet you." The doctor's steel-gray eyes swept over her, his expression unchanged. "Dr. Richard Gaves," he replied curtly. "I trust you were thoroughly briefed on our procedures before arriving." Before Maya could respond, Dr. Gaves continued, "We maintain very high standards at St. Mary's. I expect you're prepared to meet them." Without waiting for a reply, he brushed past her, leaving Maya standing alone in the hallway. Her outstretched hand slowly fell to her side. The interaction left her feeling deflated, but Maya refused to let it dampen her spirits. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and knocked on the door. Maya knocked on the head nurse's door, and while waiting for a response, her mind wandered back to her days in nursing school. Her mother's words echoed in her ears. "My dear daughter," her mother had said, her voice a mix of pride and concern. "You will have to work twice as hard as others, but never let them see you sweat. You come from a line of strong women, and you have that strength within you." Maya recalled the late nights studying, the extra hours in the lab, and the constant feeling of having to prove herself. She remembered the subtle rejections from some professors, the raised eyebrows when she aced an exam, and the whispered comments from classmates questioning whether she truly belonged. But above all, Maya persevered. She graduated at the top of her class. Her determination and skill had silenced even the harshest critics. Now, standing in the hallway of St. Mary's, Maya drew strength from those memories. She had overcome obstacles before, and she would do it again. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with a stern expression. "You must be Ms. Parker," she said, her tone sharp. "Come in, we have much to do, and I expect you to keep up." As Maya followed the head nurse into the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something larger than a new job. The atmosphere in the hospital seemed charged with tension. A silent storm was brewing beneath the surface of professional smiles and sterile efficiency. Little did Maya know that her presence would soon become the catalyst for change within the corridors of St. Mary's, challenging long-held prejudices and exposing the toxic culture lurking behind its prestigious facade. The rest of Maya's first day passed in a whirlwind of orientations, introductions, and a mountain of paperwork. As she navigated the hospital, she couldn't help but notice the subtle ways she was being excluded. Conversations would abruptly cease as she approached, only to resume in hushed whispers as she passed. Her attempts to engage with fellow nurses were met with polite but distant responses, leaving her feeling like an outsider in an environment that should have been collaborative. By the time her shift ended, Maya was emotionally and mentally drained. As she gathered her belongings from her locker, she overheard two nurses whispering around the corner. "Did you see the new hire?" One whispered. "Yeah," the other replied. "I don't know what they were thinking. This isn't exactly the neighborhood for." Maya's hand froze on the locker door, her heart sinking. She had hoped that the initial coldness was just first-day jitters, but now the reality of her situation was becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't just a new job. It was going to be a daily battle against prejudice and misconceptions. As she left the hospital, the weight of the day pressed down on Maya's shoulders. She walked to the bus stop, her mind swirling with a mix of emotions. The excitement she had felt that morning had been replaced by a sense of doubt and isolation. Settling onto the hard plastic seat, Maya pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. After 2 rings, a warm, comforting voice answered. "Hello, my darling girl. How was your first day?" Hearing her mother's voice, Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes. She took a shaky breath, determined not to break down in front of others. "It was tough, Mom," she said, her voice a whisper. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before her mother spoke again, her voice full of understanding and strength. "Maya Marie Parker, you listen to me. You have worked too hard to let anyone make you feel less than. Remember who you are and where you come from. You're not just there for yourself. You're there for every little black girl who dreams of walking those halls one day." Maya closed her eyes, letting her mother's words sink in. "I know, Mom. It's just harder than I expected. Nothing worth doing is ever easy, baby," her mother replied. "But you have generations of strength behind you. Hold your head high, work harder than anyone else, and never let them see you sweat, you hear me?" "Yes, Mom. I hear you," Maya said, feeling a renewed sense of determination. As she ended the call, Maya noticed a sleek black Mercedes slowing down as it passed the bus stop. Through the tinted windows, she caught a glimpse of Dr. Greaves, his eyes locking onto hers for a moment before the car sped away. Maya straightened her shoulders, her mother's words echoing in her mind. She might be facing an uphill battle, but she wasn't alone. With the strength of her family behind her and a determination to prove herself, Maya knew she could overcome any challenge St. Mary's threw her way. As the bus approached, Maya stood up, ready to face a new day. Little did she know that her presence at St. Mary's was about to set off a chain of events that would challenge the very foundation of the hospital's culture, expose long-hidden prejudices, and force a reckoning that was long overdue. The following weeks at St. Mary's General Hospital unfolded like a slow-burning fuse. Each day added another layer of tension to Maya Parker's already challenging work environment. The initial coldness she had experienced on her first day had evolved into a more insidious form of exclusion, something harder to pinpoint but impossible to ignore. As Maya made her morning rounds, she couldn't help but notice the stark difference in how she was treated compared to her white colleagues. Dr. Richard Greaves, in particular, seemed to take a perverse pleasure in finding fault with her work, no matter how diligently she performed her duties. Nurse Parker. Dr. Greaves boomed one morning, his voice echoing through the busy nurses' station. I trust you're familiar with our procedures by now. We cannot afford any mistakes. The way he emphasized the word mistakes sent a shiver down Maya's spine. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. Of course, Dr. Greaves. I assure you I have a thorough understanding of all hospital protocols. Dr. Greaves raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. We'll see about that, he said. I hope you've learned everything you need to know here. The barely veiled condescension in his tone was not lost on Maya, nor on the other nurses, who pretended to be engrossed in their work while clearly eavesdropping. As Dr. Greaves walked away, Maya could feel the weight of unspoken judgments pressing down on her. Throughout the day, Maya found herself assigned the most challenging and undesirable tasks, while her white colleagues were given relatively straightforward cases. Maya was repeatedly sent to deal with the most difficult patients and the most complex procedures. Maya, would you mind taking Mr. Robert in room 305? A fellow nurse asked, her voice saccharine sweet. He's been a little difficult today. Maya nodded, knowing full well that difficult was an understatement. Mr. Robert was notorious for his racist outbursts and had brought 2 nurses to tears that week. Still, Maya approached the task with unwavering professionalism, determined to prove her worth. As she entered Mr. Robert's room, bracing herself for the inevitable barrage of vitriol, Maya couldn't help but wonder if this assignment was another way to test her resolve or, worse, to set her up for failure. What are you doing here? Mr. Robert spat as soon as he saw her. I told them I don't want no black nurse touching me. Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for the onslaught of hateful words. Mr. Robert, I'm here to check your vitals and change your dressing. I assure you I'm fully competent to take care of you. As she worked, enduring a steady stream of insults and slurs, Maya maintained her composure. She completed her tasks with precision and care, refusing to let Mr. Robert's bigotry affect the quality of her work. As she finally stepped out of the room, Maya found Dr. Greaves waiting in the hallway, his face a mask of false concern. Everything all right in there? Nurse Parker? We heard quite a bit of noise. Maya met his gaze steadily. Mr. Robert's vitals are stable, and his dressing has been changed. Is there anything else you need from me, Dr. Greaves? For a moment, surprise flickered across the doctor's face, quickly replaced by his usual condescending mask. Well, let's hope you can maintain that level of composure with all your patients. We wouldn't want any complaints, would we? As Dr. Greaves walked away, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she had just passed some kind of test, one she should never have had to take in the first place. The rest of Maya's shift passed in a blur of endless tasks and subtle slights. She found herself constantly double-checking her work, not because she doubted her abilities, but because she knew that even the smallest mistake would be magnified and used against her. As the day wore on, Maya couldn't help but notice how her white colleagues seemed to glide through their shifts with ease, chatting and laughing while she struggled under the weight of a disproportionate workload. The disparity was glaring, but every time she considered speaking up, the memory of her mother's words held her back. Never let them see you sweat. By the time her shift ended, Maya was physically and emotionally drained. As she gathered her belongings from her locker, she overheard 2 nurses whispering nearby. Can you believe they're making such a fuss about diversity hires? One said, her voice dripping with disdain. It's not like they can keep up with the rest of us anyway. Maya's hand froze on the locker door, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to confront them, to defend herself and her abilities, but she knew that any such confrontation would only serve to reinforce their prejudices. Instead, she quietly closed her locker and left the hospital, her head held high despite the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. As Maya waited at the bus stop, the sleek black Mercedes she had seen earlier pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing Dr. Greaves behind the wheel. Nurse Parker, he called, his voice dripping with false concern. Waiting for the bus again? How unfortunate. I suppose that's all you can afford. On a nurse's salary, isn't it? Before Maya could respond, Dr. Greaves sped away, leaving her standing there, a mix of humiliation and anger churning within her. The casual cruelty of his words cut deep, reminding her once again of the uphill battle she faced every day at St. Mary's. As she boarded the bus, Maya's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The excitement and hope she had felt when she first started at St. Mary's seemed like a distant memory, now replaced by a grim determination to survive in this hostile environment. But even as she wrestled with the day's events, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something had to change. The question was whether she would succumb to the constant pressure or if her perseverance would eventually force a shift in St. Mary's toxic culture. Little did Maya know that an unexpected ally was about to enter her life, someone who would help tip the scales in her favor and expose the deep-seated prejudices that had long festered within the walls of St. Mary's General Hospital. As the bus rumbled through the darkened streets, Maya closed her eyes, drawing strength from the memory of her mother's words and the resilient heritage that flowed through her veins. Tomorrow would be another battle, but she was determined to face it head-on, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Maya arrived at St. Mary's with a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent the night reflecting on her experiences and reminding herself why she had become a nurse in the first place: to help people, regardless of their background or her own struggles. As she approached the nurses' station, Maya noticed a flurry of activity. Nurses were bustling about, preparing a room, and there was an air of anticipation she hadn't felt before. "What's going on?" Maya asked one of her colleagues, curious about the commotion. The nurse momentarily forgot her usual coldness towards Maya and replied excitedly, "We're getting a VIP patient. Some big shot who had a skiing accident. Broke both his arms, from what I hear." Before Maya could ask any more questions, Dr. Greaves appeared, his face uncharacteristically grave. "Nurse Parker," he said, his voice sharp, "I need you to handle the new admission in room 412. Mr. James Edwards suffered a severe skiing accident and has fractures in both arms. I expect you to provide him with the utmost care and attention." Maya nodded, recognizing the assignment for what it was: another test. "Of course, Dr. Greaves. I'll take care of it immediately." As she made her way to room 412, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment was different. The air of importance surrounding this patient made her wonder if there was more to the situation than met the eye. Entering the room, Maya was greeted by the sight of a middle-aged man lying in bed, both arms encased in casts. Despite his injuries, there was a quiet air of authority about him that Maya immediately noticed. "Good morning, Mr. Edwards," she said, approaching the bed with a warm smile. "I'm Nurse Maya Parker, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay with us." Mr. Edwards looked up at her, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Good morning, Nurse Parker," he replied, his voice surprisingly strong for his condition. "I appreciate your assistance. I must say, I didn't expect to end up here after a skiing accident." As Maya began to check his vitals and assess his condition, she couldn't help but notice the way Mr. Edwards observed her every move with keen interest. Unlike some of the other patients she had dealt with, there was no hint of prejudice or disdain in his gaze, only thoughtful curiosity. "You seem very competent, Nurse Parker," Mr. Edwards remarked as she adjusted his four. "How long have you been working at St. Mary's?" Maya paused, surprised by the genuine interest in his tone. "I've been here for a few weeks now, sir," she replied cautiously. "It's been quite an experience so far." Mr. Edwards raised an eyebrow at her diplomatic answer. "I see," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "And how do you find the hospital? Does it live up to its prestigious reputation?" "I would hope so." Maya hesitated, unsure how to respond. She was saved from having to answer by the arrival of Dr. Greaves, who burst into the room with an overly cheerful demeanor that Maya had never seen before. "Mr. Edwards," Dr. Greaves exclaimed, his voice dripping with false warmth, "I trust Nurse Parker is taking excellent care of you. We only assign our best staff to our most esteemed patients." Maya tried to keep her expression neutral, knowing full well that Dr. Greaves had never shown such confidence in her abilities before. Mr. Edwards, however, seemed to pick up on the inconsistency. "Indeed, Dr. Greaves," he replied, his eyes flicking between the doctor and Maya. "Nurse Parker has been doing a fine job. I was just asking her about her experiences at St. Mary's. Dr. Greaves' smile faltered for a moment before he quickly regained his composure. Well, I'm sure she'll tell you everything has been wonderful. We pride ourselves on our inclusive and supportive environment at St. Mary's. Maya felt a surge of anger at Dr. Greaves' blatant hypocrisy, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Mr. Edwards, however, seemed to sense the underlying tension. Is that so? He mused, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. Well, I look forward to experiencing this supportive environment firsthand during my stay. As Dr. Greaves began to explain the details of Mr. Edwards' treatment plan, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something significant. The way Mr. Edwards looked at her, the deliberate nature of his questions. It was as if he was seeing beyond the polished facade of St. Mary's. Over the next few days, Maya found herself spending more time in Mr. Edwards' room than with any other patient. Despite his injuries, he was alert and engaging, often asking her questions about her work and her background. Unlike many of the other patients and staff, Mr. Edwards seemed genuinely interested in her answers, never once displaying the slightest hint of the prejudice she had grown accustomed to. One afternoon, as Maya was changing Mr. Edwards' dressing, she overheard a conversation outside the room that made her blood run cold. "I don't care what Dr. Greaves says," a nurse's voice hissed. "I don't trust that Parker woman with our VIP patient. Who knows what she might do?" "I know," another voice agreed, "but we can't say anything. They'll just accuse us of being racist." Maya's hand trembled slightly as she finished her task. The weight of constant suspicion and distrust was taking its toll. Mr. Edwards, ever observant, noticed her distress. "Everything all right, Nurse Parker?" he asked, his voice gentle yet probing. Maya forced a smile. "Of course, Mr. Edwards. Just focusing on getting the dressing right." Mr. Edwards paused for a moment, his eyes studying her face. "You know," he said finally, "I've always believed that a person's true character is revealed not by how they treat their superiors but by how they treat those they consider their inferiors." Maya looked up, surprised by the deliberate nature of his remark. Mr. Edwards held her gaze, a knowing look in his eyes. "I've seen a lot in my life, Nurse Parker," he said, "and I can tell you, the view from this bed is quite revealing." Before Maya could respond, Dr. Greaves entered the room, interrupting their conversation. As she left the room, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Edwards was more than just a VIP patient. His words and actions suggested a deeper understanding of the dynamics at play in St. Mary's. And for the first time since she had started working there, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. Little did she know that Mr. Edwards' presence was about to set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of St. Mary's General Hospital, exposing the deep-seated prejudices that had long festered beneath its pristine surface. As the days passed, Maya found herself increasingly isolated at St. Mary's. The initial coldness from her colleagues had evolved into open hostility, with whispered comments and pointed stares following her wherever she went. Dr. Greaves, emboldened by the lack of consequences for his behavior, became more and more blatant in his attempts to undermine her. One morning, as Maya was reviewing patient charts at the nurse's station, Dr. Greaves approached her with a stack of files. "Nurse Parker," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "I need you to handle these cases today. They're particularly challenging. I trust you're up to the task?" Maya glanced at the stack of files, immediately recognizing that it was nearly double the workload of her colleagues. She met Dr. Greaves' gaze steadily, refusing to show any sign of fear. "Of course, Dr. Greaves. I'll take care of it right away." As Dr. Greaves walked away, a smirk played on his lips. Maya heard him mutter under his breath, "Let's see how she handles this." Throughout the day, Maya found herself rushing from one challenging case to another, barely able to catch her breath. The patients assigned to her were among the most difficult in the hospital, many with complex medical needs or challenging personalities. Despite the overwhelming workload, Maya refused to let her standards slip. She approached each patient with the same level of care and professionalism, even as exhaustion began to set in. The constant pressure, however, was taking a toll on both her physical and mental well-being. As she rushed to answer another call light, Maya overheard two of her colleagues whispering nearby, "Can you believe they're making her handle all these critical cases?" One nurse said, her voice laced with disdain. "It's like they're just waiting for her to mess up." "I know," the other replied, "but you have to admit it's impressive how she keeps going. I would have cracked a long time ago." Maya felt a mix of anger and hurt wash over her, realizing that her colleagues were not only aware of the unfair treatment but also actively watching to see if she would fail was almost too much to bear. As the day wore on, Maya found herself visiting Mr. Edwards' room more frequently. Unlike the rest of the hospital, his room had become a sort of sanctuary for her, a place where she could catch her breath and feel, if only for a moment, that someone saw her true worth. "Nurse Parker," Mr. Edwards greeted her as she entered his room for a routine checkup. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Maya forced a weak smile. "Just a busy day, Mr. Edwards. Nothing I can't handle." Mr. Edwards studied her face for a moment, his eyes filled with concern. He said carefully, "There's a difference between handling something and thriving in it. From what I've seen, you're more than capable of the latter." His words, though kind, only served to highlight the stark contrast between how Mr. Edwards treated her and how the rest of the hospital staff did. Maya felt a lump forming in her throat, the weight of her isolation threatening to overwhelm her. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "I appreciate your kindness." As she turned to leave, Mr. Edwards called her back. "Nurse Parker," he said, his voice filled with a quiet authority that made her stop. "Remember, sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to speak up." Maya left the room, her mind swirling with the implications of Mr. Edwards' words. As she returned to the nurse's station, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Little did she know that the next day would bring a series of events that would push her to her limits and force a confrontation that had been brewing since her first day at St. Mary's. The following morning, Maya arrived at work to find the hospital in a state of heightened activity. Rumors swirled about a major emergency surgery scheduled for later that day, with several hospital board members and important guests expected to observe. As Maya began her shift, she couldn't help but notice the palpable sense of anxiety permeating the hospital. Nurses and doctors alike seemed tense, the pressure of the upcoming surgery weighing heavily on everyone's minds. Mid-morning, Dr. Greaves approached Maya, a glint in his eye that immediately put her on guard. "Nurse Parker," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "we need you to assist in the emergency surgery this afternoon. It's a critical case. I trust you're prepared to handle it?" Maya felt a mix of surprise and suspicion wash over her. Being asked to assist in such a high-profile surgery would normally be an honor, but coming from Dr. Greaves, she couldn't help but wonder if there was an ulterior motive. "Of course, Dr. Greaves," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'll be ready." As Dr. Greaves walked away, Maya heard him mutter to another doctor, "Let's see how she handles this kind of pressure. This should be interesting." The hours leading up to the surgery were a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Maya threw herself into her work, double-checking everything to ensure she was as prepared as possible for whatever challenges the surgery might bring. As she donned her surgical scrubs, Maya couldn't help but notice the skeptical glances from some of the other staff. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "Never let them see you sweat." The surgery began, and Maya found herself working alongside Dr. Greaves and several other senior staff members. The tension in the room was palpable, with the knowledge that important observers were watching their every move adding an extra layer of pressure. Despite the challenging circumstances, Maya remained focused, her movements precise and efficient. She anticipated the surgeon's needs, handing them instruments before they even asked. Her years of training and experience shone through. However, as the surgery progressed, Maya noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Dr. Greaves, usually so confident and assured, seemed to be faltering. His hand trembled slightly as he prepared to make a critical incision. In that moment, Maya realized that Dr. Greaves was about to make a mistake that could jeopardize the patient's life. Without hesitation, she spoke up. "Dr. Greaves," she said, her voice clear and steady, "perhaps we should consider approaching from a different angle. The patient's anatomy suggests it might be safer." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Maya. Dr. Greaves glared at her, a mix of surprise and anger flashing across his face. For a moment, Maya thought he might dismiss her suggestion outright. But then, almost imperceptibly, Dr. Greaves nodded. He adjusted his approach as Maya suggested. As they continued the surgery, it became clear that her intervention had likely saved the patient's life. As the surgery concluded successfully, Maya could feel the weight of many eyes on her. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others, including Dr. Greaves, seemed to seethe with barely contained anger. As they began to clean up, Dr. Greaves turned to Maya, his voice low and menacing. "Nurse Parker, I need to see you in private, immediately." Maya followed Dr. Greaves out of the operating room, her heart pounding. She knew that speaking up had been the right thing to do, but she also knew that it could cost her her job. As they entered a private room, Maya was surprised to see that it was Mr. Edwards' room. In the focus of the surgery, she had forgotten that he was still a patient at the hospital. Dr. Greaves, however, seemed too angry to notice or care where they were. As soon as the door closed behind them, he turned to Maya, his face flushed with anger. "How dare you question my judgment in there?" he hissed, his voice laced with venom. "Do you know who you're dealing with? You're lucky I don't fire you on the spot for such insubordination." Maya stood her ground, her voice calm but firm. "Dr. Greaves, I was simply doing my job. Patient safety." "Your job?" Dr. Greaves interrupted, his voice rising. "Your job is to follow orders, not to think you know better than your superiors. This is exactly why people like you don't belong in a prestigious institution like St. Mary's. You're here because of some misguided diversity effort, not because you have any real skill or knowledge." As Dr. Greaves continued, his words grew increasingly racist and vitriolic. Maya felt a mix of anger and despair wash over her. All she had endured, every slight and microaggression, seemed to pale in comparison to this blatant display of prejudice. Just as Maya was about to respond, a voice cut through the room, stopping Dr. Greaves mid-sentence. "Dr. Greaves," Mr. Edwards said, his voice filled with a quiet authority that neither of them had heard before. "I believe you've forgotten where you are and who you're speaking to." Both Maya and Dr. Greaves turned in surprise to see Mr. Edwards sitting up in bed, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Mr. Edwards," Dr. Greaves stammered, his face paling as he realized the gravity of his mistake. "I didn't realize you were awake. I apologize for disturbing you." "Oh, I'm very much awake, Dr. Greaves," Mr. Edwards replied, his eyes narrowing. "And I've been awake for quite some time. Long enough to observe the disgraceful way you and others in this hospital have been treating Nurse Parker." Maya stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. Mr. Edwards, the quiet, unassuming patient, was suddenly radiating an aura of power and authority that filled the room. "Mr. Edwards," Dr. Greaves began, his voice trembling slightly, "I assure you there's been a misunderstanding." "There's been no misunderstanding," Mr. Edwards interrupted sharply. "What I've witnessed during my time here is a clear pattern of discrimination and harassment, and it's going to stop right now." As Mr. Edwards spoke, the realization dawned on both Maya and Dr. Greaves that he was no ordinary VIP patient. The way he carried himself, the authority in his voice, it was clear that Mr. Edwards wielded significant power. Who are you?" Dr. Greaves asked, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Mr. Edwards smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Someone who has a say in the future of this hospital. And right now, Dr. Greaves, I'm not feeling particularly inclined to support an institution that allows such blatant racism and unprofessional conduct." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Maya felt a rush of emotions. Relief that someone had finally witnessed and acknowledged the treatment she had endured, anger at the injustice she had faced, and a glimmer of hope that perhaps things could finally change. Little did they know that this confrontation was about to set off a chain of events that would shake St. Mary's General Hospital to its core, exposing long-hidden prejudices and forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. The tension in Mr. Edwards' room was palpable as the full weight of his words sank in. Dr. Greaves, his face ashen, struggled to regain his composure. Maya stood silently, her mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. Mr. Edwards, now sitting upright in his bed, regarded Dr. Greaves with a steely gaze. I think it's time we had a frank discussion about this hospital's culture. Don't you? Before Dr. Greaves could respond, there was a knock at the door. A flustered-looking nurse poked her head in. Dr. Greaves, the hospital administrator, is looking for you. It's urgent. Dr. Greaves glanced between Mr. Edwards and the nurse, clearly torn. Finally, he gave a stiff nod. We'll continue this discussion later. Mr. Edwards, Nurse Parker, you're both dismissed for the time being. As Dr. Greaves hurried out of the room, Maya found herself alone with Mr. Edwards. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Nurse Parker, Mr. Edwards finally spoke, his voice softer now. I think it's time I properly introduced myself. My name is James Edwards, and I'm the CEO of Healthcare United, one of the largest healthcare corporations in the country. Maya's eyes widened in shock. Healthcare United was a powerhouse in the medical world, known for its influence and resources. Suddenly, Mr. Edwards' earlier remarks about having a say in the hospital's future made perfect sense. Mr. Edwards, Maya began, unsure what to say. Please have a seat, Mr. Edwards said, gesturing to a chair beside his bed. I think we have much to discuss. Over the next hour, Mr. Edwards revealed that while his time at St. Mary's was unplanned due to his skiing accident, it had opened his eyes to deep-seated issues within the hospital. I came here as a patient, expecting nothing more than quality medical care, Mr. Edwards explained. Instead, I witnessed a culture of discrimination and unprofessionalism that goes against everything I believe in as a leader in healthcare. He went on to describe how he had observed the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination Maya faced, the microaggressions, and the overall toxic culture that seemed to permeate the hospital. Your experience, Nurse Parker, unfortunately, is not unique, Mr. Edwards said, his voice filled with a mix of anger and determination. But it is unacceptable, and it's going to stop right now. As they talked, Maya felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. For the first time since she had started at St. Mary's, she felt truly seen and heard. Mr. Edwards listened intently as she shared her experiences, his face growing more serious with each revelation. Thank you for your honesty, Nurse Parker, Mr. Edwards said when she finished. Your resilience in the face of such adversity is commendable. But it's time for systemic change, not just individual perseverance. Just then, there was another knock at the door. The hospital administrator, looking flustered, entered the room. Mr. Edwards, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I understand there have been some concerns about our hospital's operations. I assure you we take these matters very seriously. Mr. Edwards raised an eyebrow. Do you? Because from what I've observed, the only thing taken seriously here is maintaining an outdated and discriminatory status quo. The administrator paled, clearly unprepared for such a direct rebuke. I'm not sure I understand. We've had diversity initiatives. Initiatives aren't enough, Mr. Edwards interrupted sharply. What you need is a complete overhaul of this hospital's culture. And it starts at the top. Over the next few hours, Mr. Edwards laid out his demands for change. He called for a full investigation into the discriminatory practices at St. Mary's, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and a restructuring of the hospital's hiring and promotion practices. As for Dr. Greaves, Mr. Edwards said, his voice hard, I expect his conduct to be thoroughly investigated. His actions today were not only unprofessional, they were discriminatory and potentially dangerous to patient care. The administrator, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded numbly. Of course, Mr. Edwards, we will begin implementing these changes immediately. As the day wore on, Word spread throughout the hospital about Mr. Edwards' true identity and the changes he was demanding. The atmosphere in the halls of St. Mary's became electric, a mix of fear, anticipation, and for some, hope. Maya, still processing everything that had happened, found herself the center of attention. Colleagues who had previously ignored or belittled her now approached her, some offering awkward apologies, others seeking her insights into the impending changes. As her shift ended, Maya visited Mr. Edwards' room one last time. She found him sitting up in bed, looking tired but satisfied. "Nurse Parker," he greeted her with a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind, but I've recommended you for a position on the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Your experience and insights will be invaluable as we work to transform St. Mary's." Maya felt a rush of emotions: gratitude, hope, and a newfound sense of purpose. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "For everything." Mr. Edwards shook his head. "No, I should be thanking you, Nurse Parker. Your courage and professionalism in the face of adversity were truly inspiring. You reminded me why I got into healthcare in the first place: to make a difference in people's lives." As Maya left the hospital that evening, she couldn't help but feel that a new chapter was beginning, not just for her but for St. Mary's as a whole. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time since she had started working there, Maya felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Little did she know that the changes set in motion that day would have far-reaching consequences not just for St. Mary's but for the entire healthcare industry. The story of a dedicated nurse and an unexpectedly influential patient was about to become the catalyst for change on a scale neither of them could have imagined. The following days at St. Mary's General Hospital were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The revelation of Mr. Edwards' true identity and his demands for change sent shockwaves throughout the entire institution. The hospital's once pristine facade had been cracked, exposing the deep-seated issues that had long festered beneath the surface. Early Monday morning, Maya arrived at the hospital to find a flurry of activity. News vans were parked outside, reporters clamoring for statements from anyone willing to speak. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, with staff members huddled in small groups, whispering frantically. As Maya made her way to the nurses' station, she noticed Dr. Greaves being escorted to the administrative offices by security personnel. Their eyes met briefly, and Maya saw a mix of anger and fear in his gaze before he was led away. "Maya!" a voice called out. She turned to see Emily, one of the nurses who had previously been cold to her, approaching with an awkward smile. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I treated you. I didn't realize." Maya nodded, accepting the apology but unsure how to respond. Before she could say anything, an announcement came over the hospital's POS system. "All staff members are required to attend an emergency meeting in the main auditorium in 30 minutes. Attendance is mandatory." The auditorium was packed when Maya arrived. She found a seat near the back, acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers following her. At the front of the room, she could see Mr. Edwards, now dressed in a crisp suit despite his still-casted arms, speaking quietly with the hospital administrator and several other official-looking individuals. As the room settled, Mr. Edwards stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention. The whispers died down into a tense silence. "Good morning," he began, his voice firm and authoritative. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm James Edwards, CEO of Healthcare United. For the past week, I've been a patient here at St. Mary's, recovering from a skiing accident. During this time, I've had the opportunity to observe the daily operations and culture of this hospital." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "What I've witnessed has been deeply troubling. I've seen a culture of discrimination, favoritism, and unprofessional conduct that has no place in modern healthcare." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some staff members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in agreement. "Let me be clear," Mr. Edwards continued. "The events I've witnessed, particularly the treatment of Nurse Maya Parker, are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a systemic problem that has been allowed to fester for far too long." Maya felt. All eyes in the room turned to her. She sat up straighter, meeting her colleagues' gazes with quiet dignity. Mr. Edwards proceeded to outline the changes that would be implemented immediately. These included a thorough investigation into discriminatory practices, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and a complete overhaul of the hospital's hiring and promotion processes. Furthermore, Mr. Edwards added, his voice hardening, those found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior will face severe consequences. This includes Dr. Richard Greaves, who has been suspended pending a full investigation into his conduct. The announcement sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. Maya could see that some of Dr. Greaves' longtime supporters looked shocked and angry, while others seemed relieved. I know these changes may be difficult for some of you, Mr. Edwards continued. Change is hard, but let me be clear, this is not just about doing the right thing ethically. It's also about providing the best possible care for our patients. A diverse, inclusive, and respectful workplace leads to better outcomes for everyone. As Mr. Edwards concluded his speech, he made one final announcement that sent a jolt through the room. Finally, I'd like to introduce you to the person who will be leading many of these changes. Nurse Maya Parker has agreed to take on the role of Director of Diversity at St. Mary's. Her experience and insights will be invaluable as we work to transform this institution. Maya felt a mix of shock, pride, and apprehension wash over her as applause thundered through the room. She hadn't expected the announcement, having only discussed joining the Diversity and Inclusion Committee with Mr. Edwards. As she walked to the front of the room at Mr. Edwards' invitation, she could see a range of emotions on her colleagues' faces: surprise, respect, and in some cases, lingering resentment. Standing at the podium, Maya took a deep breath before addressing the room. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. To all of you, I want to say this. I stand before you not as an adversary but as a colleague, one who believes in the potential of St. Mary's and everyone in this room. The road ahead will not be easy, but I pledge to work with all of you to create a hospital where every employee feels valued and every patient receives the best possible care, regardless of their background. As Maya spoke, she could see the impact of her words. Some staff members nodded in agreement, while others looked thoughtful. Even those who had been openly hostile to her in the past seemed to be listening intently. After the meeting, Maya found herself surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations, apologies, and in some cases, tentative olive branches. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted dramatically. While there was still tension and uncertainty, there was also a palpable sense of hope and possibility. As the days passed, Maya worked closely with Mr. Edwards and the hospital's leadership to begin implementing the promised changes. It was a grueling but exhilarating task, and for the first time since she had started at St. Mary's, Maya felt as though she was truly making a difference. That evening, as Maya prepared to leave the hospital, she found Mr. Edwards waiting for her near the exit. Nurse Parker, he said with a warm smile, or should I say Director of Diversity Parker. How are you holding up? Maya gave a tired chuckle. It's been quite a day, Mr. Edwards. I'm still processing everything, to be honest. Mr. Edwards nodded understandingly. I know it's a lot to take in, but I want you to know that I have complete faith in your ability to lead these changes. Your resilience and integrity in the face of adversity are exactly what St. Mary's needs right now. As they walked out of the hospital together, Mr. Edwards turned to Maya with a serious expression. You should know that what's happening at St. Mary's is just the beginning. I plan to implement similar changes across all of Healthcare United's facilities. Your story, Maya, has the potential to ignite a revolution in how we approach diversity and inclusion in healthcare. Maya felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but instead of feeling burdened, she felt empowered. I'm ready for the challenge, Mr. Edwards. Together, we can make real and lasting change. As they parted ways, Maya couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just a few short days. From feeling isolated and on the verge of giving up, she now stood at the forefront of a movement that had the potential to transform not just St. Mary's, but the entire healthcare industry. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and resistance from those who opposed change. But as Maya looked back at the hospital, she felt a surge of determination. This was no longer just a job. It was a calling, an opportunity to ensure that no other healthcare professional would have to endure what she had experienced. With renewed purpose, Maya set off into the evening, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. The transformation of St. Mary's had begun, and with it, a new chapter in the fight for equality and inclusion in healthcare. In the months following Mr. Edwards' revelations, St. Mary's General Hospital underwent a profound transformation under Maya's leadership as Director of Diversity. With Mr. Edwards' continued support, the once toxic culture began to shift towards inclusivity and respect. Mandatory diversity and inclusion training, initially met with resistance, gradually opened minds and changed hearts. Dr. Greaves, following a thorough investigation, was terminated from his position, sending a clear message that discriminatory behavior would no longer be tolerated. As the changes at St. Mary's gained attention, Maya found herself in demand as a speaker at medical conferences and diversity workshops. A year after Mr. Edwards' fateful intervention, she stood before a packed auditorium at a national healthcare conference. 1 year ago, Maya began, "I was a nurse on the verge of giving up. Today, I stand before you as living proof that change is possible, that one voice can make a difference." She shared the story of St. Mary's transformation, not shying away from the challenges they had faced, but also highlighting the triumphs. The lives touched, the minds changed, and the culture shifted. After the conference, Mr. Edwards, now fully recovered from his injuries, approached Maya with a warm smile. "Maya," he greeted her, "you've come a long way from the nurse I met a year ago." They discussed the progress at St. Mary's and its ripple effects across the healthcare industry. Mr. Edwards shared that several other hospitals in the Healthcare United network had begun implementing similar programs. "You know, Maya," Mr. Edwards said, "when I came to St. Mary's after my skiing accident, I never could have imagined the journey it would set in motion. You've not only transformed St. Mary's, but also reignited my own passion for this work." As Maya prepared to return to St. Mary's, she reflected on her incredible journey. From an isolated, disillusioned nurse to a leader and changemaker, she had come so far. The work was far from over, but Maya felt a sense of hope and determination stronger than ever before. Upon her return to St. Mary's, Maya was greeted by Emily, a former cold colleague, now a staunch ally. The hospital buzzed with a newfound energy, staff members collaborating and communicating in ways they never had before. In the main lobby, Maya paused before a new mural depicting a diverse group of healthcare professionals working together. A plaque beneath it read, "Diversity is our strength. Inclusion is our commitment. Compassion is our calling." Settling into her office, ready to face new challenges, Maya smiled. The transformation of St. Mary's was just the beginning. The real work of changing hearts, minds, and entire systems was ongoing, and she was ready for it all. She was committed to fighting for a truly inclusive healthcare system, one day at a time. Which moment in Maya's journey resonated with you the most? Was it her perseverance in the face of discrimination, or perhaps Mr. Edwards' unexpected intervention? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I pour my heart into creating these heartwarming stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going. I appreciate you being on this journey with me. This story is a testament to the fact that one person daring to stand up can create massive change. If you were Maya, what would you do in the face of injustice? Have you ever had to fight for fairness in your work or life? Share your story in the comments. You never know. Your voice might inspire and motivate someone else. If you found this story meaningful, please share it with your friends and family to spread the message of fairness, perseverance, and positive change. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more meaningful stories. Wishing you strength and success. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared for the purpose of spreading humane values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any errors, please overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.